A river bell tolls, fish stale wind rides the Thames, wooden wheels grind over wet stone. A cart creaks forward, flanked by mailed riders whose eyes never leave the rope coils. The city watches from windows and market stalls, lips tight, fingers counting silently. You can feel it, authority rehearsing itself, turning punishment into choreography and the street into a stage. Ancient sources report cheers and curses in equal measure, though accounts differ and bias bleeds through. The name whispered is a banner and a warning, stitched together by rumor and fear. Is this justice at work, or a lesson written on a moving body? By the time the cart stops, the message has already found its audience. Submit, remember, repeat. Reasonable historians caution that details get sharper with retelling, like blades honed by memory. Yet the broad arrangement remains: a captive displayed, a route chosen, a spectacle managing emotions. The air tastes of iron and river salt. Someone laughs too loudly, then hushes, as if scolded. A child asks why the man is famous. No one answers quickly. The cart rolls on, rehearsing power in public daylight. To see why that performance felt inevitable, we must start earlier, with the hunt that made a reward worth betraying. Before the spectacle, there was price and pursuit. Crowns do not track fugitives alone, they recruit gossip, hunger, and debt. Bounties ripple outward, turning suspicion into wages and neighbors into temporary officers of the state. Surviving records are patchy and often partisan, but they consistently hint at paid eyes along the roads. Each tavern rumor shortens distances. Each constable's nod maps a corridor through towns that fear occupation. Scotland, already ragged from campaigns and requisitions, becomes a net woven of favors and threats. The logic is brutal and efficient. Who eats if they shield a legend, and who starves if they do? Informants multiply where granaries are thin and winter memories long. Does loyalty endure when a purse lands on the table, or does caution dress itself as patriotism? Reasonable scholars argue the chase relied as much on local resentments as royal directives. Once coin sweetens silence, trust curdles. The circle around a hunted man tightens by the hour. Immediate consequence follows. Letters travel, watches rotate, and familiar paths grow unsafe overnight. Patrols learn his habits, his couriers, the cadence of his disappearances. A mistimed errand becomes a pattern. A friendly door becomes a trap with a latch inside. In that pressure, a confidant wavers, a relative hesitates, a go-between bargains. The bounty doesn't just buy information, it rents conscience on a weekly rate. And so the net stops being theoretical and becomes a night road, a farmyard, a door that opens late. The man who once moved like smoke will step into a room already measured by others. That is how a hunt ends, not with thunder, but with a whisper sold at market price. The next scene waits at a quiet holding near Glasgow, where reliability finally fractures and Rob Royston enters the story. Rob Royston sleeps lightly, fields frosted, dogs restless, doors barred with simple pegs. Riders dismount before the gate, breathing through cloth to quiet themselves. A coated tap, a pause, another. Then a hinge sighs and the first mistake opens. Accounts differ on who invited them in, yet every version leaves suspicion at the threshold. The room smells of peat smoke and sweat. A cloak lies folded near a travel-worn sword. Hands move fast. One man blocks the doorway. Two cut the distance. A third smothers the lamp. Surprise is a tactic, not a miracle. Rehearsed grips seize elbows, twist balance, and collapse a body safely. A prudent caveat later chronicles hardened villains to make justice look cleaner than it was. The gag is crude linen. The cords are cart rope. The search yields letters and tokens worth more than silver. Did betrayal speak softly, or did necessity simply take the shortest path? Ancient sources report names with confidence, but evidence is fragmentary and colored by later politics. Outside, a horse shifts and snorts. Inside, a wrist knot tightens until resistance quiets. They bind the ankles for transit, then raise him just enough to walk without leaving scuffs. One rider inventories the room aloud, voice steady, each item assigned a story in yesterday's ink. Another keeps pulse and breath in earshot. Prisoners die inconveniently when pride ignores limits. Immediate consequence follows, the circle of trust collapses, and the state gains a living emblem for its procession. News rides faster than wagons. By dawn, a map of watchers redraws itself along the southern roads. The party avoids market lanes until daylight, then chooses them deliberately, teaching a lesson with hooves and harness bells. He is not beaten senseless. He is conserved, evidence with ankles, lungs, and a face the city will recognize. A short halt secures iron to rope, upgrading farm tools into policy. A final glance sweeps the yard for witnesses whose testimonies might turn romantic. Then the gate closes, the field exhales, and night releases the rumor it has swallowed. The next step is movement, measured and public. The journey south begins to assemble its audience. They kept him upright and moving, a visible line of custody across half a country. Dawn chilled reins and fingers. Leather creaked. Breath drew vapor from horse nostrils. At first, the party cut through hedgerows and lanes where turnips outnumbered witnesses. Later, they swung toward towns by design, letting harness bells announce the lesson. Crowds form wherever rhythm repeats. Hooves and wheels give rumor a marching beat. Some watched in awe, some muttered prayers, some measured the rope discreetly with their eyes. Chroniclers disagree on insults shouted, yet most agree on the pace. Deliberate, unhurried, instructive. A captured symbol draws coin to windows, children to fences, and militia to corners. What lesson lands harder than the sight of a legend reduced to cargo? Guards rotated in practiced intervals, keeping fatigue from opening foolish opportunities. A physician's apprentice checked skin tone and breath because a corpse cheats the script. The carts stopped at wells and toll bars, where officials inspected seals as if reading prophecy. Vendors learned the route by noon, selling cider to the curious and silence to the nervous. Priests watched from porches, scribes copied names, innkeepers marked which rooms were never again discreet. Reasonable historians note that details of jeers and cheers sharpen with distance, not proximity. Immediate consequence follows. Every mile converts uncertainty into spectacle, and every witness becomes a messenger. The procession prints itself onto memory. Road dust, iron stink, a face fixed forward under escort. By evening, guards allow a longer view, knowing fear requires rehearsal like any craft. A prisoner who staggers is pitiable. A prisoner who endures is useful to the story. The party rides on at legal daylight, then camps inside borrowed walls by curfew. Torches hiss in damp air. Someone sharpens a blade on stone for effect. No one speaks the name casually now. The syllables travel wrapped in caution and awe. When the Thames finally widens and traffic thickens with barges, the cart does not hurry. The capital has been notified by hooves, gossip, and the steady grammar of rope. By the time London's gates loom, the city is already reading the arriving text aloud. The next step is to shape that text into a performance, hall, and audience ready. London inhales spectacle like weather. Rumor condenses on awnings and lingers above market steam. Dockhands pass the news with crates. Apprentices trade versions while sweeping thresholds clean. Taverns practice the story, and the story practices them in return. Every telling grows sharper. Some claim he limped, others that he stared down riders as if measuring them. Ancient sources report contradictory health notes. Scholars argue memory serves politics before medicine in such tales. The city's spine stiffens with ceremony. Watch rotations posted, corridors cleared, side doors catalogued. Goldsmiths debate whether a mock laurel will be used. Tailors joke grimly about borrowed dignity. Will the court deliver law or theater, and does the difference matter once drums begin? A clerk updates dockets, adds titles that bruise like accusations, and rehearses their order aloud. Scribes prepare fresh quills for words that will outlive bodies. The ink will not hesitate. Vendors angle for curb space along the likely route, selling pies, broadsheets, and brave opinions. Mothers warn children to keep back. Fathers pretend calm and count the soldiers twice. Hymns hum under breath near churches. Dice clatter behind shutters near alleys. Reasonable caution. Much of this atmosphere is reconstructed. Evidence is fragmentary, and later writers embellish margins. Immediate consequence follows. Audiences form in advance. Expectations harden, and mercy grows scarce in noisy company. The city wants a narrative with clean edges. Capture, charge, chastening. No ambiguity left to stain it. Yet older men in corners remember lost causes that refuse to stay buried by decree. A courier gallops through Cheapside. Shutters lift. The legal machine ticks in practiced increments. Westminster's stones cool in shade while officials pace, checking benches, banners, and the sight lines of power. A scaffold is not only wood and nails, it is also angles, echoes, and arithmetic. Even the air is arranged, roots for breeze, room for silence, room for the cheer. By late afternoon, long shadows point toward the only hall big enough to hold the script. The streets narrow to a funnel, and the city gathers itself for a single, rehearsed breath. Doors will open soon, and with them the claim that law-wearing ceremony is still law. Our path steps inside at Westminster Hall next, where stagecraft titans and titles do the talking. Westminster Hall swallows sound, then returns it polished, like a chapel that rehearses authority. Benches climb in tiers, clerks align tools, and a narrow dais holds men whose words travel. The prisoner stands ringed by officers, iron kissing ankle and wrist, posture forced to read as defiance. Some accounts place a mocking garland, leaves wired into triumph reversed, though evidence is fragmentary and contested. The herald lists titles with deliberate weight, letting syllables perform before they carry any meaning. A charge sheet follows, measured like drum beats, each clause hammered until echo replaces doubt. Is a trial still a trial when the verdict enters the hall before the prisoner does? He answers briefly, denying betrayal of a monarch whose oath he never swore, voice steady, breath caged. The bench does not argue the point. It edits the framework and edits our policy. Witness names appear and vanish as recitation, less testimony than choreography designed for a crowded memory. Scribal ink does not tremble. Parchment lies still. The theater proceeds because theaters hate empty pauses. Reasonable historians caution that later retellings sharpen humiliation, adding props the record cannot safely confirm. Immediate consequence follows. The city hears certainty, not questions. Mercy shrinks to an interval between announcements. Officers step closer at key phrases, ensuring the body behaves when the script requires a posture change. The hall itself seems to lean forward, a building trained to host sentences and applause together. A clerk totals offenses aloud, then fixes the sum with a phrase older than most coffins. The ritual says dignity survives inside the machine, but the machine needs symbols more than accuracy. Crowds shift at the doors, counting beats, learning the order that fear prefers to follow. The decision lands with ceremonial calm, a seal pressed into wax that never expects appeal. What remains is to justify method, not outcome. The law will declare the path, step by step. The next section turns from stagecraft to wording, from benches to parchment, where treason is defined to fit. The easiest indictment says treason. The hardest question asks treason against whom, when no oath anchors duty. Officials solve the puzzle by broadening terms, treating war as rebellion and opposition as personal betrayal. Clauses braid together arson, murder, raids, and the charge that he raised war against rightful authority. Later narratives add insinuations of royal ambition, though scholars argue evidence is sparse and politically convenient. Did the bench pursue truth or coherence, and does coherence suffice when spectacle demands a single villain? The wording treats guardianship like usurpation, translating leadership during interregnum into a private insult against the crown. By that grammar, denying allegiance becomes irrelevant. The realm itself is declared the injured signer. Reasonable caution, medieval indictments traveled with agendas, and neat categories often arrived after the bodies. Immediate consequence follows. Guilt enters through definition, not confession, and punishment gains momentum long before wood is cut. The clerk recites punishments in ritual order, each matching a sin the parchment claims to weigh. Dragging answers rebellion, hanging answers murder, and evisceration answers the alleged profanation of sanctified peace. The sequence is less jurisprudence than catechism, a lesson arranged for nerves, lungs, and memory. Who argues finer points when a city already pictures ropes, knives, and a cart with room? A brief murmur notes that he denied treason precisely because no oath ever bound his mouth. The bench replies by treating the realm as universal oath, a blanket signed at birth and tax. Thus, the text closes its loop, raising form above fact and tidiness above documented obligation. The seal meets wax again. Quills lift. The human object of policy exhales once, slowly. Outside, carpenters check lashings and height. Inside, officers rehearse transitions, so no gesture looks improvised. The decision's logic will not be relitigated in public. It will be illustrated in streets. A steward folds the parchment, cautious hands turning doctrine back into portable authority. The audience, having learned the words, now demands pictures to match their learned certainty. The hall empties like a drained lung, leaving only echo, dust, and a door toward daylight. The next section leaves parchment behind and enters the road, where drawn becomes splinters, stones, and spectators. Drawn begins as hardware, hurdle boards, a draft rope, and a horse that hates crowds. The prisoner is lashed flat, shoulders pinned, ankles yoked, chin forced high by a short line. Guards ride close, not for mercy, but to prevent stones from ending the script prematurely. The route is chosen for eyes, not speed, folding past markets, guild halls, and parishes that collect stories. Wheels and skids grind. The hurdle chatters over cobble, turning human weight into noise you cannot ignore. Chroniclers disagree about spittle, flowers, or filth thrown, but they converge on pace, slow enough to teach. What lesson lands hardest when a body becomes a moving map through familiar streets? A crier rides ahead, naming offenses as if auctioning shame, syllables striking shutters like thrown pebbles. Children stand on barrels, apprentices climb signs, mothers rehearse warnings that sound practical, not compassionate. The prisoner blinks grit and sunlight, saving breath by stillness. Endurance doubles as accusation in such theaters. Reasonable caution applies. Later retellings embroider the route, but the design reads clear even through dispute. The city learns choreography by watching. Guard spacing, rope angles, and the interval between insult and command. Immediate consequence follows. Spectators convert into couriers, carrying the performance towards the hurdle we'll never visit. Officials watch responsiveness like physicians, adjusting speed when limbs whiten or lips shade beyond desirable color. The horse flicks flies, the rope creaks, officers change flanks so fatigue never writes its own subplot. A priest steps forward, offers words. The procession leaves silence instead, because silence photographs better than argument. The hurdle arrives at Smithfield with breath still present, because a corpse aborts the remaining lesson. Smoke from cook fires leans across the green. Stalls are shuttered. The open ground becomes a diagram. Ropes hang ready from a crossbeam. Ladders wait. Sawdust drinks whatever must not linger in puddles. The cart halts beneath the beam. Irons release. Wrists are retied with a craftsman's tidy pride. The city inhales together, because this next technique requires timing that the audience will sense without instruction. What comes now is death rehearsed to the edge, hanging measured so knives still have living work. The rope is short by design, denying the neck a drop long enough to show mercy. A noose settles behind the ear. The knot sits where math and habit say, breath will struggle. Executioners learn pulse with fingers, not philosophy. They watch eyelids, tongue, and the color that drains first. The beam groans, the body rises. Weight teaches silence faster than any clerk could manage. Is mercy present when the rope grants breath only to extend the lesson that follows? The crowd tightens, measuring seconds with teeth on lips, while officials count quietly to keep craft from cruelty's drift. Some accounts say the rope slackened twice, others that a single near death framed the scene perfectly. Scholars remind us that such precision often grows in retelling. The principle, however, remains unambiguous. The aim is approach, not arrival. Bring him near the gate, then refuse him entry until knives are staged. Immediate consequence follows. A living chest still moves, guaranteeing the next sequence will register on nerves and eyes. A soldier whets the noose to bite. Another steadies ankles to prevent kicking from reading as defiance. The air smells of smoke, dung, and wool. A stallion screams somewhere. Metal rings against wood like punctuation. A herald recites again, voice even, so the moral does not drown beneath animal sounds and weather. The prisoner's face turns a color the city will remember, not because it's rare, but because it's useful. A hand lifts, flat, the agreed signal. Helpers drop weight, then catch it, tug, and test for consciousness. Someone in the crowd crosses themselves. Someone else counts deliberately as if numbers could tidy what eyes refuse. The rope slackens. Breath crashes back like a guttered candle snatching flame from its own smoke. Ladders scrape. Boots thud. The body is lowered onto planks that know their role without instruction. He is alive enough for speech but receives none, because words would compete with what blades must say. The gallows becomes backstage. The green becomes a table. The audience leans forward as if invited. The bridge is sharp and simple. Knives, hooks, and a small brazier step into view, ready to argue doctrine with fire. Knives arrive like arguments, practical, sharp, and presented in an order that feels rehearsed. Helpers strip the tunic cleanly, pinning wrists and knees so movement reads as procedure, not struggle. A brazier answers the wind with sparks. Iron tools warm until their temper holds steady. Witnesses later describe castration and opening the abdomen, though accounts differ and details often serve politics. How much precision do we trust when later writers prefer clarity over discomfort or doubt? The cutter works quickly at first, then deliberately, choosing motions that instruct rather than merely injure. Breath rasps against practiced silence. Officers watch color and pulse, preventing death from stealing the remaining lesson. A bowl, a cloth, a gesture toward the fire, each prop joins the catechism of ceremonial pain. Reasonable scholars warn that embroidery grows in retelling. Still, the sequence's purpose is rarely disputed. Entrails meet flame, smoke rises oily, and theology borrows the vocabulary of sacrifice without admitting kinship. Immediate consequence follows, the crowd's nerves align, and the state's grammar of fear lands without translation. A herald repeats titles and charges, pinning cause to effect so memory cannot claim confusion afterward. The prisoner remains conscious enough to register touch, heat, and the choreography of people stepping in time. Officials avert improvisation by counting softly, a human metronome that smooths the edge of cruelty. Somewhere a cartwheel clicks once, somewhere a prayer folds, all syllables swallowed before they touch air. The brazier eats what it is given and offers smoke the city will remember longer than words. A physician's apprentice signals halt. The craft pauses, then resumes, confirming intent still governs what hands perform. Does the ritual cleanse the law or merely perfume it with the smell of burned certainty? The cutter wipes the blade along straw, not for cleanliness, but for theater each witness will repeat. A bucket passes, sand darkens, and sawdust learns secrets it will never share again. The lesson has reached its peak. Survival remains only to authenticate the sentence's closing shapes. The knives step back. The brazier quiets. The scaffold resets for final movements, beheading and the carpentry of division. The end begins with a practiced stillness, as if the air signs its own warrant. Axes test their edge on leather. A block is placed where sightlines reward straight spines. Officers confirm breath persists, because a living witness sharpens the final image beyond dispute. Some sources claim a brief prayer. Others insist on silence disciplined enough to pass inspection, which closes a performance cleaner, piety at the margin, or the economy of unadorned steel. The prisoner is positioned, hair drawn clear, chin set where geometry meets habit and long experience. The headsman measures distance with eyes and shoulders, an artisan applying math to a public certainty. One stroke is doctrine, two are tolerated, three stain the craft with gossip that lingers for years. Reasonable caution chronicles flatter executioners when courts need dignity. Failures often vanish into rewritten margins. Weight falls, wood thuds, and the city exhales, through 1,000 careful teeth at once. Immediate consequence follows. Identity becomes portable, authority becomes divisible, and the script unlocks its last tableau. Assistants raise the head briefly, not to gloat, but to staple verdict to image unmistakably. Blood is managed with sawdust and brisk movement. The ground remembers without becoming the whole story. Quartering proceeds as carpentry more than spectacle, ropes and wedges translating anatomy into transportable warnings. The rhythm is practiced, the faces expressionless, as if routine could bleach meaning from method. Officers note labels and destinations on wax tablets because logistics completes what doctrine begins. Do we witness justice concluded, or does the concluding simply prepare the realm for new sentences? A herald names again, voice even, ensuring the moral survives, noise, weather, and later embroidery. The block is removed, tools are wiped, wood absorbs what testimony cannot safely preserve in ink. Clerks tuck ribbons of parchment into folders. A steward pockets the seal as if cooling a coal. The crowd loosens into streets and stories, each witness carrying a slightly different angle of the same shape. The green empties like a lung. Hammer taps fade. Geese fuss somewhere beyond the market edge. What remains is distribution and display, a cartography of warning that will redraw the island by evening. The next section maps those routes, bridge and gate, port and market, where limbs become signposts for obedience. Distribution is policy. Policy requires maps. Maps require places with crowds and crossings. The head rides first, salted for travel, then fixed where river and road meet most eyes. London Bridge becomes a classroom wall. Commuters read before they intend to, and memory obeys. Chroniclers often agree on that placement, while quarters disperse north and east along war-worn arteries. Some accounts name Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth. Others reorder destinations to suit later pride. What matters to authority is reach, ports, markets, and gates that convert anatomy into signage. Does a realm feel larger when its warnings are posted like waymarks against forgetting? Messengers carry writs that explain the parcels. Sheriffs prepare scaffolds that need only nails and twine. A carpenter hammers brackets into beam and masonry. A clerk records the hour to standardize retelling. Children count ribs with daring glances. Traders adjust prices to the tempo of gathered crowds. Priests argue the propriety of such relics with measured phrases that do not block the wind. A ferryman points his pole and tells the same story 5 ways before dusk. Reasonable historians note later embroidery, yet the administrative logic shows through like grain in wood. Immediate consequence follows, travel becomes catechism, and each town adds its voice to a rehearsed analysis. Inns develop new names for corners that smell of pitch. Watchmen practice explanations in different weather. The realm doesn't just punish a man, it conscripts geography, turning distance into an amplifier. Notices forbid souvenir taking with threats that sound both petty and enormous. A magistrate scans faces for laughter sharp enough to count as dissent in a busy square. The tide thickens beneath the bridge. Crews glance up, lower eyes, and work with steadier hands. Far away, another quarter arrives by dust cart, escorted by men who keep conversation shallow. The display goes up without ceremony, yet ceremony radiates from the simple act of elevation. Is this security or an admission that ideas walk faster than patrols can march? A gull wheels above the bridgehead, unimpressed. A boy memorizes the angle so he can draw it later. A seller of eel pies moves to a better vantage because hunger and history often share pavement. The network is now complete. The island hums with signposts and second thoughts. The next section listens for echo, rumor, prayer, swagger, and orchestrated silence in the hours that follow. After spectacle, there is always echo. Streets retell, taverns edit, and doorways footnote with lowered voices. A hawker sings a softened version, selling safety with pastry. A sailor adds thunder where there was none. Broadsheets emerge by nightfall, trimmed to avoid charges, but pointed enough to sell out quickly. Officials monitor corners where talk coagulates. Lanterns pause, ears open, and boots resume with studied boredom. Do people believe more strongly after seeing, or does seeing bruise belief into caution? Ancient sources report mixed reactions, muted cheers, careful prayers, arguments disguised as wagers and riddles. The prudent add that evidence is fragmentary. Silence, not speech, often leaves the clearest administrative trace. Immediate consequence follows. Patrols thicken at bridges and markets, and permits gain new signatures overnight. A notary refuses a risky affidavit, a parish clerk misplaces a note that might have become trouble. The city practices composure. Bells ring at the usual hours, bakeries open, and workshops clatter on cue. Yet certain paths bend around the bridge, as if feet carry a memory the mouth will not state. A mother shortens errands, a bookseller closes early, a fiddler chooses softer tunes near the alehouse. Somewhere a soldier brags too loudly, then pays for the next round to buy back the room. A magistrate's phrase, measured and dry, circulates as if it were mercy rather than instruction. Does the government prefer noise it can count, or quiet that looks like consent from a distance? The answer is management. Proclamations read at set corners, then gathered carefully for evidence of heckling. Scribes write summaries that feel like weather reports. Gusts of applause here, scattered doubts there. A courier rides north with copies of the phrasing, so outlying towns can synchronize their tone. Meanwhile, the quartered warnings continue their work, patient and tireless, in daylight and drizzle alike. A seamstress recites the charges backward to remember them. A stonemason sketches the gallows between measures. The performance has ended, but the audience remains on stage, repeating cues in ordinary gestures. By midnight, streets grow thin. By dawn, the story sounds practiced, as if born that way. Later, histories will claim inevitability, yet inevitability is merely repetition that forgot its first rehearsal. The bridge to the next question is memory itself. Why some figures dissolve and others turn into living flags. Our next section traces that stubborn afterimage, where symbol outlives strategy and complicates official victories. Symbols outlive paperwork. Paperwork, perversely, teaches people where to plant their symbols. Ballads tidy motives, sanding splinters off choices so a banner can fly without snagging. Street retellings turn a complex fighter into a single, portable shape, a name that fits on breath. Monuments later add height and stone, letting memory impersonate geography with admirable stubbornness. Do we honor a person, or our private need for a mirror that flatters courage? Reasonable scholars argue that ancient sources report confidently where evidence is fragmentary and that confidence travels well. Chroniclers stitched grievance to triumph, then stitched both to nation, so threads refuse to pull free centuries later. Plays and pamphlets compress trials into clean arcs. Clean arcs make policy look inevitable in hindsight. The spectacle that tried to extinguish a cause instead forged an emblem with enviable endurance. Immediate consequence follows. Officials learn that terror teaches quickly but cannot control what students remember next. Children inherit choruses before footnotes, and choruses outpace corrections on any road with taverns. A face once paraded as warning is repurposed as witness, then mascot, then compass. Memory prefers verbs, the law prefers nouns. Audiences perform the translation in kitchens and cues. Accounts differ on speeches, gestures, and last looks, yet the silhouette refuses to fade on command. Later uprisings borrow posture and phrasing, treating the old scaffold like a rehearsal room with open doors. Priests, poets, and politicians collude unintentionally, each selecting moments that serve congregations of different sizes. A gullible certainty grows at the edges, the price of stories needing corners that reality never offered. Still, doubt survives inside the legend, a small, honest draft that keeps myth breathing rather than embalmed. Is that doubt a flaw or the very seam that lets future readers enter responsibly? The emblem becomes a test more than a trophy. It asks what courage costs and who collects the bill. Administrations change, bridges age. The map of warnings becomes a map of pilgrimages and photographs. What began as theater of obedience ends as theater of identity, with tickets sold in cash and pride. Our closing gathers those threads, how power staged a lesson, how audiences rewrote it, and what that means next. A state that turns punishment into theater wins the moment and risks the century. The street learned its cues: rope, drum, decree, yet the audience kept the melody and changed the lyrics. Immediate consequence follows. In the days after, people moved carefully, permits multiplied, and silence passed for consent. Longer consequence begins at once. The emblem refused burial, teaching courage by echo, not instruction. A third, quieter outcome persists: skepticism toward ceremonies that equate volume with virtue and spectacle with law. What part of the script did you feel tighten most? The parchment's clarity or the craftsman's timing on the green? If authority needs stages, it must accept critics who memorize exits as well as entrances. The trial framed treason to fit, then matched sins to instruments, claiming coherence where allegiance was never sworn. The city believed because it was shown, but being shown is not the same as being convinced. That difference is where symbols grow, and where policies meet their unintended heirs in song, stone, and whisper. The bridge forward is practical. Law should resist choreography that requires knives to argue doctrine. Else the show recruits new actors, and the crowd returns, ready to rewrite another ending with the same props. Our next chapter follows that bridge, an ordinary gallows whose mechanics force Parliament to refine mercy into mathematics. Until then, keep one question near. When a government asks you to watch, what exactly is it selling?